Hi, welcome to Detours, Understanding Acquired Brain Injury. This is Genes and Chromosomes, Unit 4, Episode 1. Having learned some of the basics about genetics, let's talk about a topic you may actually be more familiar with, and that is home genetic testing. And we're also later going to talk about some of the medical professionals that study genetics. In the last 2 decades, genetic testing has gone from a niche kind of medical specialty to, honestly, a multi-billion-dollar industry. And that's because of home genetic testing. Most people are familiar with some aspects of genetic testing, whether it's because you've seen a villain in some movie or TV show captured in some popular crime show, or it's because you've ordered a kit to find out the background of your family. Maybe you've even been tested for a genetic disease or disorder by your family doctor. Maybe you've had to have fetal testing because of an unusual finding through genetic testing. But everyone's familiar with genetic testing to some extent. This will be a fairly short unit on home or consumer-based genetic testing, this specific episode. So later we will discuss the medical professionals who study genetics and genetic treatments as their specialties in medicine. But let's get started. Now, the most common type of genetic testing is the genetic test that is aimed at consumers. These are called direct-to-consumer testing, or DTC testing. DTC is exactly what it says on the tin. But why make consumer-based genetic testing in the first place beyond making a buck? Thanks to certain biotechnology breakthroughs recently, there have been some more sophisticated medical tests that have become easier to do, and they don't require a medical professional to perform. They can be done by machines. DTC, or direct-to-consumer testing, is it's pretty easy for a biotechnology company now to assemble and read the results from a computer to have it performed by robots, essentially. And it helps to pay for some of the work which is less profitable but more helpful in looking for diseases, disorders, and doing research. And that's the underlying reason why these companies do a lot of the testing for consumers. So how does it work? Well, basically, a private company will sell a genetic test directly to a consumer in a prepackaged kit that comes with instructions. These kits are typically purchased as gifts for friends and family members, or they're purchased through a pharmacy or ordered from a website, which is devoted to a specific medical condition. Or it's used for figuring out your family tree, your ancestry. In fact, these are the most popular way to find a direct-to-consumer genetic test. Things like 23andMe or Ancestry, or name that company, By the way, if you're interested, I'd like to know too. Please comment below if somebody gifted you with a direct-to-consumer genetic test, or you gifted somebody else with one. I'm just curious to see how many out there have done that. It is remarkable how far it's come in just these 2 decades. Companies that make these kits are typically pharmaceutical companies. There are many now biotech companies that are popping up as a result of the developments for genetic technology, but most of these companies are pharmaceutical companies because they have the equipment and the hardware to produce them. So these companies hire experts who can make sense of the result, or who can help them to develop the markers, the genetic markers, and help them construct a database. Often the only real difference between the kind of kits they sell directly to the consumer versus the kind of tests they provide to licensed medical professionals is the depth of the analysis, or for which specific alleles that they're testing. Companies that make the DTC kits, they understand the professionals obviously don't require the same kind of hand-holding that a lay consumer does. And a professional may only want to receive the raw data so they can do the analysis themselves, or they may want a very narrow amount of highly specialized information. So the results may come back to them much more quickly. Also, a medical professional may choose to have the data sent to specialized medical databases, or they may be building their own database. So there are some specific changes or some specific components that are different when it comes to medical professionals and what they're looking for. Their tests may also look for things which are not really verified statistically as associated with a specific disease or disorder, but they are trying to build enough information that eventually it will become a direct-to-consumer verification of a specific disease, disorder, or something that suggests, hey, this may be this condition. So there are definitely differences, but they're pretty similar when it comes to the nuts and bolts of testing. So a physician or an advanced practice provider may have their own genetic analyzer in their office. They're expensive, but they're not so expensive that a doctor's office wouldn't have something like this. Maybe they just want the raw kit from the company, and they'll test the person who comes into their office themselves and then do the crunching on their own. They also may have proprietary closed databases, just like a direct-to-consumer company does. And they will purchase for access to these kind of databases, which have all the different gene variants, and then they'll do the comparisons to find it out. But these are the primary differences between what you're testing for versus what a professional's looking for, at least for these kind of kits. When a consumer receives a genetic test, they just need to provide a saliva sample, and they swab the inside of their cheek, and then they put the swab in a sealed tube, and then that sample contains buccal, what are called buccal or cheek epithelial cells, which line the inside, and some leukocytes or white blood cells, and then the person who ordered the kit will fill out an online or mail-in form, seal the sample, associated paperwork, put it in the envelope and send it to the testing company. The biotech company then breaks down the cells using their centrifuge and their machines for analysis, and then they'll perform what's called a single nucleotide polymorphism search. They'll look for specific changes associated with alleles genes, and they'll compare the customer's alleles to that proprietary database which they control, and then they'll make that analysis and say, all right, well, these genes are typically associated with this ethnic group or this group from this area in Asia, Europe, wherever, and we see these genes with Alzheimer's or with a neuromuscular disease or with this eye color, whatever, and then they'll send this information back to the customer. And that's basically how it works. Testing for these samples involves what's called a microarray technique, which we can discuss in another chapter of this unit. Genetic testing companies typically provide a few of the different services, which I just quickly touched on, but most common are that of figuring out your ancestry, and which groups, which blood groups you share in common with, or, which areas of what continent, or historical lineages, and as well as diseases and, things like that. They also do sometimes prognosticate the likelihood future medical conditions you may face, lifespan, things like that, higher, lower risks of certain things. that's generally what they provide. Direct-to-consumer genetic test will, the company will send back to you in an email, mail, printout, or both, just this list of variant alleles which they find in someone's genome. Often the analysis will include like a statistical rarity of this kind of thing, condition or conditions associated in any like pertinent research studies demonstrating this condition. A good testing company will remind consumers the limits of direct-to-consumer studies. These tests are simple to take. They serve as effective screening tools for the public, and they've really taken off in popularity. Most of these tests look for common and easy to identify genetic disorders, and they can help identify problems that make it easier to communicate with the consumer's medical provider too. Some test companies even provide like a number to call and speak with a genetic counselor. Now, there are two major problems with such testing. First of all, is the number of variant samples in their database. The more samples they have of people with different disorders or in different groups, things like that, the higher the accuracy, the more likely they are to correctly identify a specific problem, disorder, whatever. The fewer samples, the less accurate they are, the more of a shot in the dark it is. And remember, this is a screening. This is not a diagnosis of a specific condition. They're just telling you, hey, pay attention to this. This may be a problem. But that's all they can really do. So don't substitute this for a genuine medical diagnosis. That is up to your physician and a geneticist if you are working with one. They also won't tell you how many comparison samples are in their database, because a competitor may say, I just need 5 more and, I'm ahead of these guys. So understand this is a process of statistical analysis, and that means there are going to be errors, either false positives or false negatives when it comes to identifying conditions, groups, things like that. And so, again, keep in mind this can lead to errors. Okay? These screenings do not replace your doctor. An associated problem is that genes make proteins, as we've discussed plenty of times. So a gene once thought associated with a given condition may be found in future research and not to be causative of a condition. So, things change, new research, new insights. So again, we just know that a variant allele may produce a variant protein, but we're still not always 100% sure that it is definitely connected to this condition as new research comes out. So always keep that one in mind too. So there isn't always a professional genetic counselor to help either. So again, these tests are screenings. These are not a diagnosis. So if you took a test from a company that sent a kit to you and they have results suggesting a potential health problem, please speak to your physician or an APP about the results. So, by the way, neither is Dr. Google or Dr. ChatGPT or their AI buddies a licensed physician able to make a diagnosis. Just something else to keep in mind. Yeah, you can look stuff up and find out for yourself, but unless you're a licensed physician or advanced practice provider, APP, you are not licensed to make a diagnosis either. So always, if you have concerns, take them to your doctor or your NP or your PA or whoever to help you make more sense of this. And there are licensed genetic counselors who can also help you. So just a bit of... All right, enough of that soapbox and kind of enough of that. I do want to talk quickly about forensic genetic testing. So what is that all about? Now, you've seen this on TV shows and things like that. And yes, what this describes is genetic testing for non-clinical purposes, which is performed by specialist biological laboratories. They do genetic studies for archaeological research, anthropological testing, war and combat genetics, helping, yes, criminal investigations, missing persons. That's become big lately. professional genealogical testing. When you hire a genealogist to help you, there are genetic genealogists or specialists there. Natural and man-made disaster investigations, paternity testing, agricultural genetics, xenogenetics, exobiology research, looking at newly discovered, life, looking for newly discovered bacteria, viruses, all that kind of stuff. All of that. So forensic genetics is more than simply investigating violent crimes, although it's interesting on TV. Indeed, it's an essential use of genetic testing. But genetic testing, to be useful, requires vigorous follow-through then by the justice system. And often this is where the ball is dropped when it comes to this kind of application. In cases of war, refugees, and disasters, both natural and man-made, genetic testing on bodies and survivors of brain injury, too, to help figure out who they are is helpful. Access to database for missing people, archaeology, anthropology, professional genealogy. So universities have enormous databases, and many are published and open for research purposes. So if you're interested in pursuing that kind of medical and non-medical genetics, they're an essential tool now and are expanding the kind of things that we can do. So, so we hope you found this helpful, and we'll call it here. And please click like and subscribe. Don't forget that bell icon, and we will see you next time in Unit 4, Chapter 2, when we talk about medical professionals who do genetic testing and who help interpret and analyze when it comes to medical conditions and how they're related to genetics. Bye.